All right, Shalom Aleichem, good evening. Welcome back to our three-part series. Today we're going to be talking about Eliyahu HaNavi and does the end justify the means? The last two times we took Nevi'im that were kind of parallel, if not one after, really back to back. We're now jumping to many years back and a very different style. We talked a little bit about Eliyahu HaNavi at the end, if you will recall, right? We compared his Nevuah to Yirmiyahu, to Yonah HaNavi, but there's just so much we need to know. So much about his approach, what he said, what he did, what the response HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to him, and what it means practically for us. You'll recall, I asked you a question last week, which you all responded to, but I didn't respond to at all in my feedback. Yes? What did I ask you? What was my second question to you that I completely neglected purposely?
The criticisms we find hard to hear.
Yeah. What criticism, what about it, whether how it's said or who says it, makes it difficult for you to accept? And you all shared very authentically, very honestly with us what that is that triggers it. The reason I didn't address it was because I believe it's so important that it actually deserves a class on its own. Because so often we're taught, well, if the end will get us what we want, so who cares, bulldoze your way over. And my question is that actually true? Is that a valid Jewish approach? I know that it's an approach in the world, right? But is that something that we as Jewish people should be practicing? Is it really true that, you know, if you can keep people keeping Shabbat no matter what, so no matter what, do it, right? If we could coerce people to be a certain way, act a certain way, think a certain way, it doesn't matter how you're going to do it, just do it, right? I think there's a slogan from one of the sneaker companies, just do it. Is that really true? Should we just do it? Or does the means also matter? Let's talk about that. So tell me a little bit, because Eliyahu HaNavi is somebody who you're probably much more familiar with, right? You probably bumped into at least the name. Tell me a little bit about what you know, who he is, where does he show up in Jewish history, what do you know about him? Yeah, go ahead, Lily Naz.
Eliyahu HaNavi was, he's in Kings 1, and the main things I remember is he does the same thing of like running away from a task, and he's like in a ditch somewhere, and God like brings him food, and then he goes and does this task for God, and then later at the end of his time on earth, he passes the like mantle of being a prophet over, and it's like literally a cloak, and then there's fire and a chariot, and he goes up.
No, that's actually a really good summary. That's a really good summary of Eliyahu HaNavi, his lifetime. Notice the pushback again of not wanting to do his task, ultimately taking on the job, and then, like you said, eventually a chariot and fire and departing from the world, to the extent that there's some commentaries who say Eliyahu HaNavi never died. Some say, it's interesting, other prophets were very clear who they are, where they're from, what they do. Eliyahu HaNavi, which tribe is he from? It's a trick question. Because Chazal tell us maybe he's from Shevet Gad. Others say, no, he's from Shevet Binyamin. The others say, what are you talking about? He's part of the Sanhedrin, and he's part of the Kohanim. He just lived between two nachalot, two different plots of land that belong to two different tribes. Okay, so now we have three different. Where did he live? Eliyahu Tishbi. Is Tishbi a place, or does it mean Yishuv, and the place is Gilad? Where's he from? Who are his parents? It's very interesting. Eliyahu HaNavi. Some say Eliyahu HaNavi is a reincarnation of Pinchas. Remember Pinchas, the zealot who stands up against Zimri and Cosby? Some say, no, that's not Eliyahu HaNavi. Eliyahu HaNavi. It's an interesting personality. It's a complicated personality. And I want to walk you through a little bit of the text of how does he relate to the Jewish people? Now you have to understand, and Lily Naz, you pointed out, he doesn't want this job. He's not signing up for it for the honor, for the kavod, because he's making a lot of money. And yet his approach is severely critiqued to the extent that ultimately he loses his job. And I want to talk through that concept of what's going on. What time period does he show up? So let's look at our chart a minute. This one, the Jewish monarchy timeline. And you'll notice we're jumping back in time. Okay, if you go down to the kings of Israel, you have, look at the column of reign, where it says reign. So not the first number 22, which is Yeravam ben Nevat. Go down to the second one, which is Achav ben Omri. Okay, does the name Achav ring a bell at all? Have you heard of him? Yeah, what do you know about him, Sarla?
He wasn't a good person, maybe.
Right, that's a nice way of saying he's really bad. He's interesting. No, somebody once told me. Very nice. Whenever I don't know if it's the same in England, but in the United States, we're very politically correct with certain things. So, for example, when people want to tell me, they're like, "Oh, you're so brave." Now, they don't mean you're brave; they mean you're stupid. But they don't say stupid; they say brave. Or, that's such an interesting thing. They don't mean it's interesting. They mean you are such a weirdo. I don't understand the thing you just said, but I'm going to be nice and say that's so interesting. Yeah? Somebody once came to my in-laws' house and they have white carpets. And they have that white carpet like raising little kids. I'm like, wow, you are such incredibly brave parents. And behind that compliment, you hear, you are such nut jobs. Right? So it's interesting to always hear. So yes, Sarla, I'm with you on that. He was definitely not good. Betsy, you said something very, very important. He and his wife, if you'll recall, his wife was Izebel, right? Achav and Izebel. She was actually from the Tzidonim. Yes, she was a princess who came to the Jewish people. Whether she converts or not is a great question. But she and her husband, Achav, are single-handedly responsible for really destroying the prophets. In fact, we have one servant of Achav, Ovadiah, who takes 100 prophets and hides them in 2 separate caves to make sure that at least there'll be another generation of Nevi'im. Because we talked about this last time. Why would you listen to the message when you could just kill the messengers? Right? That solves the problem in one way. Achav and Izebel are also known as the leaders in bringing the Baal and the Asherah into the Jewish people, into their daily life, and really making Avodah Zarah the center of the Jewish community. Steps in what we would say almost is the arch nemesis of Achav. And that's Eliyahu HaNavi. You see, here's a king who is powerful, who is corrupting the Jewish people with his wife, from Dan till Beersheba, putting up idols, making sure that those who would maybe let the Jewish people come back and do teshuvah are executed. There's chaos. And comes Eliyahu HaNavi, and with the same fire that Achav is destroying the nation, he stands up against him. He's unafraid of the king. He's unafraid of taking the strictest of measures to ensure that the Jewish people don't go down the drain. He's willing to be brazen and almost seemingly cruel to the Jewish people so that ultimately he could save them. I want to look at our sheets a minute over here. Look at Melachim Aleph. Like you said, Lily Naz, correctly. So you have here an encounter where Achav and Eliyahu HaNavi meet. And here Achav is super proud. Where was he? So Achav was actually going to pay condolences to somebody named Chiel. Have you heard the name Chiel? Okay, so if you look into the Navi, we know that when Yoshua comes and conquers the land of Israel, what's the first city that he enters? Say it with confidence. Say it with confidence.
Jericho.
Very good. Yericho. He comes into the city of Yericho, destroys it completely, and what does he ban the Jewish people from doing? Very nice. Yericho is never allowed to be built again. It's a ir chareva. It's a destroyed city. In this time period, you have somebody named Chiel who says, please, why in the world would I listen to such an archaic teaching from a nonsensical leader? And he goes and he starts building the city Yericho. And we know when he starts building the city, his oldest son dies. And when he finishes building the city, his youngest dies. And everybody in between. Achav is going to pay him condolences. And he's brazen enough to have this conversation with Eliyahu HaNavi. Right? So look at the first pasuk. Vayomer Eliyahu HaTishbi mitoshvei Gilad el Achav. So Eliyahu HaNavi, from the citizens of Gilad, turns to Achav and says, Chai Adonai Elohei Yisrael asher amadeti lefanav im iya hashanim ha'ele talu matar ki im lefi dvari. Achav looks at Eliyahu HaNavi and says, look, the prophecy didn't come true. Hashem promised that there would be famine, there would be drought. We're doing fine. Yeah, Chiel may have lost a couple of children, but overall we're doing really well economically, and the curses that you said would directly be influenced by our actions aren't accurate. And Eliyahu does something very dangerous. He curses the Jewish people. He says to Achav, I promise you that there will be no rain. There will be no dew. There will be a drought until I stop it. There will be a drought. Chaya, is Chaya trying to get into class? Somebody maybe reach out to her because I see she just WhatsApped me. She may be in the wrong classroom. Thank you. Yes? Okay. Eliyahu HaNavi says, you're testing, you're brazen, you're despising not just the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but here you're coming back from a shiva, from an event that, I apologize. Okay, let me just put the speaker off. Okay, there we go. No worries. So Eliyahu HaNavi ultimately brings a drought to the Jewish people. He curses the land. And not so much he curses, but he challenges Achav back. Achav says, see, the words of the prophets, the words of the Torah, we're doing fine. Eliyahu says, no. That's not going to, under my watch, you're not going to be able to be corrupt and get away with it. And we enter a period of 3 years where there's terrible drought in Israel. Now, we thank God, most of us live in a world where we don't understand what drought means for the very simple reason, I have running water in my sink. And if I don't, I go to the grocery. I think today with our pandemic, we understand a little bit more the fear of not having. If you recall in the beginning when people were stocking up on toilet paper, right? And there was this fascinating debate, like, why toilet paper? If everybody's going to die anyway, what is toilet paper going to help, right? But there was this certain, I don't know when I'm going to be able to get something next. Maybe I'm going to go, I go to the groceries and they still don't have gloves, right? There's still certain items that we don't have. But here we're talking about on a large scale, agriculturally, there's nothing for them to eat. There's nothing the plants are wilted. The economy is shot. And like you said, Lily Naz, we have an interesting story going on over here where Hashem sends him food. Ultimately, the ravens are bringing him food. Ravens, which again are symbolic of being kind, but very unkind to their own children. And a little bit Hashem is giving Eliyahu HaNavi rebuke. They're my children. Yes, I want you to rebuke them, but have mercy. Do it from a place of mercy and not cruelty. Ultimately, he ends up going to a woman whose house. He stays there for 3 years. Her son dies. Eliyahu HaNavi brings the child back to life. Are you familiar with that story at all? A little bit. Okay. So now what happens? After 3 years, Hashem says, okay, how long? Look, I kept my side of the deal, which is you promised Achav there won't be rain. So I won't bring rain. But I want to have mercy on my children. And he commands Eliyahu HaNavi, go back. 3 years, you waited, you hoped, you thought they would change. Nothing changed. I'm not willing to wait so long. I cannot sacrifice my people to make a point. I can't do it. Right? For those of you who come from cold cultures, you'll understand what I mean. In warm cultures, you fight, and 3 seconds later, you're having tea together. Yes? In cold cultures, we could have the Cold War for 20 years. We could outdo Stalin anytime. Yeah? I mean, you have generations of families that don't talk to each other because, 3 generations ago, they had a dispute over an inheritance. We don't even know why, but we don't talk to each other. We hate each other. Yes? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm not willing to do that. I can't risk my nation. Go back. I want to look at that story of what does going back look like. So if you move down to the bolded on the second top column, it starts with Vayihi Yamim Rabim. Okay, it says Vayihi Yamim Rabim, and it was after many days. Udvar Adonai haya el Eliyahu b'shana hashlishit, and it's already the 3rd year of this drought. And Hashem says, Lech hera'eh el Achav v'etna matar al pnei adama. Go speak to Achav. You're driving a point home. It hasn't worked. You need to go and engage in conversation. Okay, and Hashem promises Eliyahu HaNavi that he's actually going to be protected. Comes Ovadia. Remember Ovadia, the one who's saving the Nevi'im while working for Achav as a servant, right? He's a double agent over here. He comes, he meets Eliyahu HaNavi. Eliyahu HaNavi tells him, don't worry, tell Achav I'm coming to meet him. Ovadia says, I know you, Eliyahu HaNavi. You have a tendency to just disappear. Yeah? You're here one day, you're across the Yarden another day, you're in Damascus. How could I trust that you're going to stay? I'm going to go back to Achav, tell him I met you. I'll come back, you won't be there. That's going to be the end of me. So Eliyahu HaNavi tells him, don't worry. I promise you I will be here. So look down at the next bolded. Vayihi kirot Achav et Eliyahu. It was when Achav sees Eliyahu HaNavi. Vayomer Achav elav. And Achav says to him, Hata ze ocher Yisrael, look at you, disgusting person, the one who harms the Jewish people. Vayomer. So Eliyahu again is unafraid of the king. There's a certain zealotry that he has, that he's not afraid. He's the person who doesn't mind making the room awkward. He doesn't care if everybody's going to be squirming in their seats and feeling really uncomfortable because he's going to say what needs to be said. And the king looks at him and says, oh, you're the oppressor of the Jewish people? And Eliyahu HaNavi responds, Vayomer, lo acharti et Yisrael. I'm not the one who harmed the Jewish people. I'm not the one who neglected them. Ki mata ubet avicha. It's you, it's your father, it's your house. Baz v'chem et mitzvot Adonai. When you left the path of God, you forsake the Jewish people. I'm just the one who brought the results to you, but I'm not the cause. V'telech achrei haba'alim. You're the one who led them astray. Now it's interesting for when you have your own time to look at why the Baal and the Asherah, what kind of avodah zarah were they? What were their sexual ramifications that they had to them, as well as the fertility of the land, why drought? Fascinating conversation for another time. But over here, Eliyahu says, I challenge you. Bring with you your Nevi'ei Habal and meet me at the top of Har HaCarmel. How many of you have been on the top of Har HaCarmel? If you're ever in Israel, it's worth climbing up. You will see the most panoramic view of Israel. It's magnificent. It's vast. It's beautiful. He says, let's call the Jewish people up there. Once and for all, we're going to prove to the Jewish people whether the Nevi'ei Habal, your camp, or whether the Nevi'ei Hashem are saying the truths. Because the Jewish people should know. You see, knowledge is something very important. The crowd is allowed to know the truths. If you're going to keep telling people that this is the path of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so prove it. Why should people just follow you and get hurt ultimately? The poor person who never thought through their theology or their ideology but is following you, why do they have to suffer? You made a decision. Why should the rest of the nation be hurt? So what happens? He brings them, Vayomer, V'ata shlach kvotz elai et kol, here. Kvotz elai et kol Yisrael Har HaCarmel. He says, bring all the Jewish people. Bring as many Nevi'ei Habal that you want. And they do. They gather all the Nevi'ei Habal. He brings 450 Nevi'ei Habal, 450 prophets with him, Achav. All the Jewish people are on the top of the mountain. And this is what Eliyahu HaNavi looks at them and says. Vayomer, look at the bold on the bottom. Ad matai atem poschim ashtei hasi'ifim. Until when are you going to keep dancing on both sides of the fence? You keep thinking, one day I pray here, and one day I go there. And some days I think this, and other days I do that. And sometimes I feel, when are you going to be decisive? Clear. I once experienced this. I was on the road, and suddenly I saw the police car in front of me zigzagging across the lanes. I never in my life saw that before. I thought maybe the cop was drunk. It turns out that that's how they slow down traffic, because everybody, right, he's going the wrong direction, so everybody behind him just comes to a screeching halt. And then he continued moving, right? Don't try that on your freeway. Eliyahu HaNavi is critiquing the Jews and saying, you think you're driving, you're a bunch of drunk drivers who don't stop switching lanes but aren't moving anywhere. You like to dance on every side of the fence. I always laugh when you see people who every single platform they advocate for. It doesn't matter if the platforms negate each other. It doesn't matter if they don't make sense for each other. I always tell this to my social workers. You don't have to be the idiot who signs up for every cause. Find the causes that resonate with you, the things you actually care about, and then dedicate yourself to them. But when you're the one, I once passed a guy who was holding like 4 different signs at the street corner, right? This was during presidential debates, campaigns. And I wondered if the guy was literate enough to read his signs, because if he would have realized that he's basically promoting 15 different parties, 12 different platforms. You can't be both. Some people love living like chameleons because it's comfortable. It's easier. It keeps you out of the limelight. Eliyahu HaNavi is calling the Jewish people out and saying, you can't. You can't, I think in English they say, you can't have your cake and eat it, which I never understood that expression, because why would I want cake if I can't eat it? But I'm sure there's more meaning to it, yes? But that's what he's telling the Jewish people. You can't dance on all different, in Yiddish there's an expression that says you can't dance on 2 different weddings at once. Yeah, that was a literal translation. Meaning you can't be in 2 places at once. And yes, it may be very painful to have to say, okay, so I'm on one side and I'm on the other side. Eliyahu HaNavi is purporting a much more black and white view of life. And we're going to see in a minute, well, is he correct? Are people really so black and white? Are issues really so black and white? Is good and evil really so contrasting that you could always choose one side? I mean, there's a reason that people sit on the fence, and it's not just because it's comfortable. The fence, if you've ever sat on it, is very prickly. It has thorns. It's not always the most comfortable spot, and yet sometimes people choose to live there because there's a sophistication in the gray. So let's see what happens. He says, Im Adonai Elohechem l'chu acharav. If God is your God, if Hashem is your God, so go after him. V'im habal, and if you believe the Baal to be your God, l'chu acharav, so then follow him. Make a decision. Stop the ambivalence. Our Chachamim tell us, En simcha kehatarat hasveikut. There's no joy like the joy of not being indecisive. For those of you who are blessed with being decisive, like myself, I go into a store and within 10 minutes, I'm out. Yes? Because for me, it's very clear what I need. I have a very clear list. When I send some other people who are related to me, I never knew there were 4 different types of garlic. There's shredded garlic, powdered garlic, minced garlic, flake garlic. I just wrote on the list garlic. There are eggs. There are organic eggs, white eggs, large eggs, small eggs, medium eggs, in a carton, in a plastic container. 18 eggs, 36 eggs. When there are so many different options, it's very difficult to be decisive. And sometimes the person who is decisive actually misses out on all the options because things are very clear. It's either right, wrong, black, white. Eliyahu HaNavi is telling the Jewish people, you cannot live with ambiguity. Choose a path and then go with it. Now, obviously, he wants the Jewish people to choose the path of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yes? And we'll see what he does afterwards. So look at the next page. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the story. Do you know what happens at Har HaCarmel afterwards? Yes, Betsy, what happens?
So he basically sets up an altar, and from what I remember, he makes almost a simultaneous offering, whereas the idol worshippers are kind of flagellating themselves and cutting themselves, and he's mocking them, like, go and scream louder, maybe your God's not listening, like he's asleep or something. And at the same time, he makes the meal offering wet, very wet, and then asks Hashem to come and burn it.
Very nice. That's exactly what happens. You have 450 Nevi'im Baal who are trying to get a single fire from heaven to come down. Now, obviously, it doesn't work. Yes, so they take the calf, they cut it up, they build a bama, a little mizbeach, right? And they're singing, they're dancing, and he's mocking them, right? He's saying, scream louder, dance harder, do more of your tricks. Yes, he's fantastic at the theatrics part because he's trying to drive a point home to the Jewish people, right? You're looking at those who are leading you. You're looking at those who you believe in, and look what they can do. Their inability to even bring down a fire from heaven, let alone anything else, right? And he's turning them into utter mockery. And then what happens? He prays, and ultimately a fire comes down from heaven, and his sacrifice is taken up. And I want to look at here, what is the Jewish response? So if you look at the bottom of the page, and I don't have page numbers, but it's page 2. Vatipol, let's go one sentence before the bolded. Vatipol esh Adonai, so a fire of God comes down. Vatochal et haolah, and it eats the sacrifice. Vet ha'etzim, vet ha'avanim, it also eats the wood. He had also taken 12 stones representing the 12 tribes. It eats that also. Vet ha'efer, and the dirt. Vet ha'mayim, and the water. Asher beta'ala lecheka. Everything gets burnt up. Now here the Jewish people are facing a cognitive dissonance. They are entrenched in worshiping the Baal and the Asherah. If you recall, we talked about Chizkiyahu HaMelech and his son Menashe HaMelech. You recall? Yes? Menashe HaMelech was known as one of the greatest leaders as far as Avodah Zarah. And you have a story, I believe it's with Rav Ashi, but don't quote me on that, where he's talking in the Gemara, they're having a conversation about Menashe HaMelech, and he calls him my chaver, my friend. Yeah? And at night, Menashe HaMelech comes to him in a dream. And he says, how dare you call me your friend? Do you know who I am? He said, I was the leader of the entire Jewish people. And I want you to know that if you lived in my generation, you would have lifted the hems of your skirts, of your robes, so you could run faster to serve the idols. It's really nice that generations later you could sit and critique me because you have absolutely no understanding of what the passion and the drive to serve idols is. But if you were my generation, you would have lifted the hems of your robe to run along with me. So we're talking about a mind that we may not understand that draw, but to be fair, we all have our own idols that we serve. And here the Jewish people who are entrenched in this worship are now faced with something that they can't say, okay, this was an accident. Maybe it was the wrong prophet. Maybe today was an off day. We have 450 of them trying. All different tricks. What's the Jewish response? Vayar kol ha'am, so the whole nation sees this. Vayiplu apneim, and they fall on their face. Vayomru, and they say, Adonai hu ha'elohim. Adonai hu ha'elohim. Hashem is our God. Hashem, He is God. And then Eliyahu, and you have to understand, this is a moment of clarity. This is a moment where the entire nation is not just saying, maybe we were wrong. They're very clearly choosing God. They're choosing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They're saying, Hashem, you are the God of the world. And on the one hand, that's incredible. We would think so. Eliyahu HaNavi was successful. 3 years of a drought, 3 years of tough love to the Jewish people, 3 years of really hurting the Jewish nation so that ultimately they could come home. But the story, if it ended here, that would be the moral of the story. Tough love works, be tough on the people, coercion is a good tactic, brainwash people from a young age because the end justifies the means. Right? Meaning, it worked. The bottom line is it worked. Though you have to ask yourself, and I'll give you a little sequel to the story, did it really work? Meaning, 3 chapters later, did the Jewish people stop worshiping the Baal? Did they really stop worshiping the idols? Did they stop doing all the things that for years they've done? Or was this a moment of almost coerced truth, where they were forced against the wall to say, hey, there's nothing more that we see, than this. So we can't tell you otherwise. Yeah. Now, some may argue and say, no, this is a moment of truth. This is a moment where despite the difficulty, the challenge, and the bad habits, this is a moment of clarity, of truth, of if I really had to decide which side I'm on, when you push me against the wall, Adonai hu Elohim. But what happens? So Eliyahu HaNavi then turns to Achav and he tells him, you better get ready because drought's over. I'm going to bring rain. Why don't you go home before you get wet? So he goes home and Achav starts heading back to Yisrael, right? To Israel, to where his capital is. And Eliyahu HaNavi commands that all 450 of the Nevi'im Baal are murdered, right? So they're all murdered. And Eliyahu HaNavi goes and Achav beats him, right? Achav beats him and he comes home to Izebel, his wife, and tells her exactly what happened. Now you have to understand, if you were to experience this, you would at least think there should be some conversation of, hey, we might be wrong, right? We might be wrong. Like maybe we're actually not correct. But when somebody's so steeped in their ideology, it doesn't matter what you see, you won't necessarily be able to change your mind. If you're not willing and open to accept that your truths may not be ultimate truths, it doesn't matter what happens. You're not going to be willing to change. Yep. So what is Izebel's natural reaction? She sends Eliyahu HaNavi a message and says, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to make sure that you are wiped off the face of earth. You, your family, everybody surrounding you. So I want to look at what happens over here. The second column. Look 2 sentences up the bold. Vatishlach Izebel malach el Eliyahu. Izebel sends a messenger to Eliyahu HaNavi. Lemor, ko yasun Elohim v'cho yosifun ki ka'et machar asim et nafshecha k'nefesh echad mehem. He said, don't worry, you and your God, tomorrow I'm going to put your soul together with all the 450 Nevi'im Baal that you killed from our camp. Vayal, vayakam, vayelech el nafsho. He's afraid for his life. Meaning she's capable of doing that. She has a proven track record. So he runs away. Vayavo Be'er-Sheva, asher liYuda, vayanach et naro sham. He leaves his servant over there. Vayahayu v'hu alach b'midbar derech yom, and he walks into the midbar Yehuda, into the desert, a day's worth of walking. Vayavo, vayeshev tachad rotem echat, and he sits under like a little brush. Vayeshal et nafsho lamut, and he asks Hashem, kill me, take my life. I don't want to live anymore. I think one of the greatest mistakes we make when we learn Tanakh in general is that we like to create Hollywood characters. What do I mean by Hollywood characters? We create such fictitious tales about them instead of reading the truth so that they become so unrelatable. You ever read the biographies? It always amazes me. The Rosh Hashiva, when he was 6 months old and breastfeeding, was reading Mishnayot. And she was such a tsanua, she was born with a head covering, and she would say Tehillim while she was eating spoonfuls of her cereal. Really? I don't know about you, but aside from making a mockery out of these people who actually became great, it leaves me with a feeling like, that's wonderful. Because I don't know about you, but when I was 3, I was definitely not reciting Tehillim over my cereal bowls, okay? Not even when I was 10. There's a certain amount of, it becomes almost a fictitious character, like, okay, so what do I have to do with them? Now, it serves a great purpose if you never want to learn from Tanakh. Yes, if you want to make sure that the Jewish people never take practical lessons from the Torah, Nevi'im and Ketuvim, it's wonderful to make characters that make no sense. Here you're dealing with something very real, which is Eliyahu HaNavi is terrified, and he says, I'd rather die than be killed. And it's a fascinating conversation about emotions, feelings, depression, anxiety. Now you may say, okay, so I'm reading into it. It could be. But it's also very obvious that that's what Eliyahu HaNavi is asking Hashem, kill me. That's what he says. I want, vayishal et nafsho lamut. I want to die. I don't want to live anymore. Wouldn't that be a smart lesson to teach? Wouldn't that be a more approachable understanding of great leadership also coming to breaking points? Yeah. Now you notice something very interesting also. If the Jewish people, because let's backtrack. Eliyahu HaNavi says, decide which side you're on. You can't be jumping on 2 sides of the camp. And it seemingly happens that they they say Adonai Hu Elohim. So what do you think that if he got all the Jewish people to do teshuvah, shouldn't he have some place of refuge within the Jewish people? Which makes you wonder again, was this epiphany that they had something that was slow, deep, a process, or was the momentary high of, wow, I saw something great, I saw something amazing, but it's like a rubber band. Yeah, you snap it open, and as soon as you let go, it snaps back. You see this, by the way, all the time with people who are in a process of whether doing teshuvah or growth, or yesterday, you didn't know which way to hold the siddur. Today, you're not just praying 3 times a day, you're also waking up for tikkun chatzot, you're busy. It's dangerous. I remember I had a friend, this is one of my really close friends. She came to my house for Shabbat, and while all the women were washing their hands, right, for netilat yadayim, for the bread, she turns to me and she says, Devorah, I don't have a ring to put in my mouth. I said, why do you need a ring to put in your mouth? She said, because I see all the women, they have rings in their mouth when they wash, and I don't have a ring. Is that part of the procedure? I said, that's a really good question. When you're becoming religious, you don't know the difference between crazy and normal. Let's be honest. Is it normal for people to walk around with myrtle branches and citrons singing and shaking around and around? So to her, that was just as normal as putting rings in her mouth. And Now, mind you, I don't know where the rings, I understand you don't want your ring to fall down the drain, but your mouth has to be empty when you're making blessings, yes? And then I realized sometimes the process of becoming something is much longer than putting on a costume. It's really easy to look apart. All you have to do is get yourself the right clothes, and I can even give you which stores to buy them from. And if you're lazy, you could order it on Amazon. But to become something, it's a long, slow process. And that's not a bad thing. Because when we flip so quickly, it's just a matter of time before we sway the other direction. And you see that over here. If the Jewish people so staunchly believed in Eliyahu HaNavi, why is he feeling so much despair? Why is he feeling so alone? Why is he so afraid? Izebel is one person. If he has all the Jewish people standing up for him, he can easily outnumber her. Yeah. So it's interesting to again put in context this process of, did they change? Was it substantial change? Was it sustainable change? So let's look at what happens. ויאמר רב אתה אדוני, קח נפשי כי לא טוב אנוכי מאבותיי. I don't have the will to live. I don't want to be here anymore. And like I said, it would be wise to talk about mental health issues in a real context. Issues that we see that come up, that real human experiences, feelings, emotions. I know those are things that we like to edit out of our text to make glorified Hollywood characters. But it would be much wiser to have relatable role models that we could actually learn from. It doesn't mean to take Moshe Rabbeinu and make him any less. It doesn't mean to take Eliyahu HaNavi and make him no greater than he was. It means that we could understand things in context and actually learn from them. But I want to move down to what happens. So he moves, Hashem gives him food, he ends up moving on, and he comes to a cave. Right? 40 days and 40 nights. Look at the next bolded. Vayavo sham el hamara. He comes to a cave. Now he walks all the way to Har Chorev. If you recall, where's Har Chorev? What did we get there? What is Har Chorev? Yeah, Har Sinai, right? Har Chorev is Har Sinai. Now we're going to see a very interesting encounter. If you'll recall, Moshe Rabbeinu, before the Jewish people got the Torah, also bumped into HaKadosh Baruch Hu on Har Chorev. Yes? Vayavo sham el hamara. He comes to the cave. Vayalin sham, and he falls asleep there. V'hinei dvar Adonai elav, and the word of Hashem comes to him. Vayomer lo, and Hashem says, Ma lecha po Eliyahu? What do you have over here? Tell me where else you've heard a similar introduction to a conversation. Go all the way back to Bereshit. What happens with Adam and Chava? Don't all answer at once.
I mean, in terms of what, there's lots of things happening to them.
But where did you hear this introduction to a conversation? Malacha Eliyahu, what are you doing here?
When Hashem asks, where are you?
Very nice. Adam HaRishon had one commandment and messed up. And now he's hiding. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to visit him in Gan Eden. And Vayomer El Adam, Ayeka, where are you? Let me ask you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't know where he is? He created the whole world. He knows where everything is. He doesn't know where Adam is? He knows, it says, Yodea machshavot klayot valev. He knows every thought that you have. He doesn't know what Eliyahu HaNavi is thinking. What is he asking him?
Basically, admit what you've done.
Oh, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving him an opportunity of self-analysis. Eliyahu HaNavi, you've been doing everything you can to stand up for me because you're zealous, because you want to do right. You want the Jewish people to be on the right track. You've tried. You brought drought. You've killed the Nevi'im Baal. You've gotten the Jewish people to say, Adonai hu Elohim. And yet you're sad. You're angry. You're hurt. You're fearful. Eliyahu, why? Why do you feel this way? You know, so often we have answers to people's questions when we should just ask them the question. Because they're the expert in their life. And when somebody says, I'm so sad, instead of telling them, well, you should do, you ever hear this? I'm so sad. Oh, you shouldn't be sad. Okay, I guess I'm not sad. When was the last person healed from, you shouldn't be sad? Okay, I'm not sad. You should be happy. Okay, now I'm happy. So now I'm sad, and I also feel bad about being sad. Yeah? It would be much wiser if we ask people, why are you sad? Because you know yourself better than I do. But sometimes you forget to ask yourself those questions of, I wonder why I feel this way. I wonder why, after all I've done, I'm sitting here on Har HaCarmel in a little me'ara, hiding from the rest of humanity, wishing I should die. Why? What are you doing here, Eliyahu HaNavi? And Eliyahu HaNavi does not respond to the prompt. Listen to what he says. Vayomer, and he says, Kano kineti ladonai, I was zealous for you. I don't understand where in the world I went wrong with this. Elohei Tzavaot, ki azvu britcha, b'nei Yisrael. I was being zealous because they left your Torah. Your children left as mizbechotecha harasu. They've destroyed your mizbechot, vet neviacha harago, and they killed your prophets, bacherev, with a sword, vivater ani levadi, and I'm the only one who's left. I'm the lone survivor here. Vivakshu et nafshi lekachta, and now they want to kill me. Eliyahu HaNavi is holding on to what I did was correct, and I have absolutely no clue why the results are the way they are. Why do you think this is? He says, I don't know. All I was trying to do is I was being zealous for you. I was standing up for what was right. I was standing on the street corners protesting and throwing bleach at women. That's what I was doing for you. I was coercing little kids to learn things, to say things, to do things that were incorrect for you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I had only you in mind. I once read this horrible article about this religious guy who would be part of a greater ring of child trafficking in Israel. Now, I say religious, very religious, and he said, part of what he said, he's being interviewed. He just doesn't know he's being interviewed. Yeah, he knows he's being interviewed. He doesn't know he's being exposed. And he said, I'm just doing this to help the religious couples who don't have children. I'm helping them do the will of God. How do you get there? How do you get to this place where you're being so self-righteous that you fail to understand how dangerous and awful and bigoted? Now, I'm not telling you, chas v'shalom, that that's what Eliyahu's motives were. To the contrary, Eliyahu HaNavi is telling HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I only did this for you. The only reason I stood up so brazenly against the people I love is because I love you more. The only reason I watched them suffer for 3 years with a drought, I killed 450 Nevi'im, is so that they could serve you. I don't know what I did wrong. Hashem says, come. Vayomer, say, come out of your cave, come out of your bubble. I understand you think this way, but I want to show you a different perspective. V'amadeta bahar lifnei Adonai, stand on the mountain. V'hinei Adonai over, v'ruach gdola, and Hashem is passing by, and there's this tremendous wind. V'chazak miparek harim, there's this wind that could just blow the mountain to pieces. U'mishaber slaim, and it could break the stones into smithereens. Lifnei Adonai, before Hashem. Lo beruach Adonai, and yet God is not in that stormy wind. That crazy wind that could break the mountain, that could destroy it to rubble. V'achar haruach, and after this tremendous wind, rash, there's an earthquake, there's an earth-shattering sound. There's a trembling. I don't know if you've ever experienced an earthquake, but California is prone to earthquakes. In fact, the first time, so I didn't know, I'm from New York, who knows about earthquakes? I sat down on my bed and suddenly the whole room moved. And I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't know I was so heavy that I sit down and like the bed moved, the house moved. And I looked at my husband, he was like, oh, that was an earthquake. I said, oh, I thought it was me. I didn't know this is what earthquakes feel like. I'm sure you've seen those comical but not fear videos of like a really heavy guy who's jumping into a swimming pool, and then on the other side of the world you see the tsunami. Do you know what I'm referring to? You have over here, the world is thundering. Lo berash Adonai. But Hashem is not found in that earthquake. V'achar harash, and after this tumult, esh, fire, destruction. Lo be'esh Adonai. Hashem is not found in that fire, that brimstone, that burning. Sometimes I hear Jewish preachers, and I don't know if they were trained by the Jews or by the Westboro Baptist Church. The amount of hell they speak, I don't know, it's not the same religion that I practice. The hell, I remember when I was younger, they once had an exhibit in one of the schools in the neighborhood that I was in. So my school took us there. It was a wax museum they created. I had nightmares for 3 months straight. There were exhibits of people, it was exhibits of what would happen in hell. And one of the images was of a woman who she hadn't enforced the tzniut rules for her daughter. And therefore in hell, she was busy pouring hot lead all over her daughter's body, and the daughter was screaming. I remember walking out of there, I couldn't sleep. Literally, I was very young. I must have been 10, 11. And thinking, I never want to die. Because that's definitely not the place I want to go to. Yeah. Lo be'esh Adonai. That fire, that brims. Yes, can you coerce people into doing things through fear? Of course. Of course. Of course. Half of the Judaism today is built on that. If you don't do X, we won't do Y. Fear of anything. Fear of excommunication, fear of losing your family, fear of the eternal world, fear of this world. So much fear. So much fire. V'lo be'esh Adonai. V'achar ha'esh, and after all this, the crazy winds that are breaking the stones, the mountains, thunder, earthquake, fire. Kol dmamat daka. There's a thin voice of silence. Vayhi kishma Eliyahu, and when Eliyahu hears this, all this thunder, this lightning, this earthquake, and then the silence, vayalet panav ba'darto, he covers his face with his beautiful cloak. Vayetze, and he comes out of the cave. Vayamot petach hamara, but he's still in the cave. You see, he's coming out, but he's still in the cave. He's in the entranceway. Interestingly enough, he's being as ambivalent as he didn't want the other people to be. V'hinei elav kol, and here's a voice. Vayomer ma lecha po Eliyahu HaNavi. What are you doing here? Now, it almost seemed, the first time I had to look twice, I'm like, wait, did the pasuk just repeat itself exactly the same thing? Is this a typo? No, it's not a typo. Because sometimes if you don't understand the question, the answer won't match up. Hashem was not asking, can you give me your coordinates? Can you please send me your GPS? Share your location on WhatsApp. That wasn't the question. The question is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Eliyahu HaNavi, I chose you for a task. And you've taken it on a tangent where you're sticking up for me, you're being zealous for me, you're caring about me, but you're neglecting my nation in the interim. Yeah, you could beat them up until they say Adonai Hu Elohim, but if you beat them so hard, there won't be a nation to say that anymore. They have to break the person. You ever heard that? I have to break them into the system. Why do you have to break them into the system? You know what you get when you break somebody into a system? You just get a broken human being. That's what you get. You don't get a person who now conforms. You now have a person who's a bunch of shards that even if Humpty Dumpty was put together again, you could never find all the pieces. You worked so hard, Eliyahu HaNavi, because you were so zealous. You were standing up for Kvod Shamayim. What do you think he was doing it for? He wasn't doing it for himself. See, unlike the zealots that we have today who actually do it because they get paid. right? And for many ulterior motives, Eliyahu HaNavi is coming from the purity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm standing up for you. You can now understand why some commentaries say, well, Pinchas hu Eliyahu Pinchas. We have the same case. Now, everybody always glorifies Pinchas and says, look what a hero he is, right? He stood up against Zimri, and because Rav Peretz always says the exact opposite. He said the only reason that Pinchas wasn't killed was because he did it from a place of care and concern, and Hashem said, I tolerate what you did because it had to have been done in this moment, and your intentions were correct. But your zealotry, your kana'ut, it doesn't have a place in Judaism. When we say diracheh, we always take out the Torah. We say diracheh dachei noam. Your ways are pleasant. V'chol netivotea shalom. And all its pathways are peaceful. I don't know about you, but what exactly is peaceful about burning down a garbage pail every single day? What is peaceful about throwing rocks on soldiers who are serving to protect us? What is peaceful about that? What is peaceful about throwing out a 12-year-old because she's wearing the wrong color stockings to school? What makes that pleasant? What makes it peaceful? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I know. So here, Eliyahu responds. Vayomer kano kineti ladonai. Hashem, I don't understand. I was standing up and being zealous for you. Ki azvu britcha bnei Yisrael, because they left your path. Et mizbechotecha harasu. They destroyed your mizbechot. Vet nevi'acha harago. They killed your prophets. You have to understand, the Jewish people were actually being terrible. Meaning, there's nothing redeeming about what the Jewish people were doing. Yes? There's no way we can interpret the actions of the Jewish people as good. Right? Eliyahu was not, there was no misperception on his end. It wasn't like, ooh, I thought you were doing something wrong, but you really weren't. I'll give you an example of that. Yes? I once had somebody tell, a principal of mine once said that you're not allowed to wear long skirts. I said, why? She said, because it's not Jewish. I said, last I checked, the non-Jews were not wearing skirts. 1. 2 is, what's wrong with wearing long skirts? It's not Jewish. Now, that's a lie. You understand? That's just a lie. Because if anything, between a long skirt and a very short skirt, I don't understand for the life of me what's wrong with wearing a long skirt. Yes? Okay. But that's a lie. Now, the same principle, God bless her soul. Did I share with you the story about the bobby pin? I think I might. Maybe? Okay, so back in the day, we used to have those side bangs, remember? Where you develop a nervous twitch because you had to keep pushing it out of your eye. Really poor style. You become either blind or you look like a pirate. Regardless, it didn't work, and then you had a perpetual twitch in your neck. That. So the next step to that horrendous hairstyle was pushing it back with what we call bobby pins. Yes. So we all wore bobby pins in high school. My principal put a note on the door, and she wrote, the 4 girls should please come to her office. I'm looking around. I understand why I'm being called to the office, but what about them? And she looks at it. She goes over to one of my friends, and she pulls this bobby pin out of her hair. She said, you see this? I'm like, yeah. Waiting, drum roll. This is something nobody in my school is going to wear. Okay. Why? She said, because this is Goyish. This is non-Jewish. The quintessential insult could be you see, if a non-Jew actually does it, so it's not considered non-Jewish. It's the Jew who's doing something that. So she said, I got tipped off that next season braids are in style. I said, wow, braids are in style. She said, in my school, nobody's going to wear braids, even though braids are a very modest thing, but it's not Jewish if it's in style. That is ultimate perversion of there's so much to this story that needs to be dissected, honestly. Yes? But over here, you're dealing with Eliyahu HaNavi, who is not incorrectly judging the Jewish people. It's not him making a mountain out of a bobby pin. Yes? It's not him picking on something that's not true. The Jewish people are doing severe averot. They're neglecting HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah, the mitzvot. They have avodah zarah everywhere. The temple. We're talking about a society that is bankrupt. Eliyahu says, my response matches what they're doing. And yet HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't agree. HaKadosh Baruch Hu disagrees with his approach. You want to be zealous, do it for somebody else. But not on my work. Not on my clock. And ultimately, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees in his second chance of asking Eliyahu, what are you doing here? Eliyahu responds the exact same way. I am being zealous for you. Now look what happens. Vayomer Adonai elav. Hashem says, you know what? Shuv ledarkecha midbara Damasek. Go back to your path. Make sure you make a little stop in Damascus. Ubata umashachta et Chazael lemelech al Aram. Go nominate Chazael as the king of Aram, who ultimately will come and destroy the Jewish people and cause tremendous suffering. Ved Yehu ben Nimshi timshach lemelech. Go anoint Yehu ben Nimshi as the king. And then Vet Elisha ben Shafat. You are clearly not the right person for the job. I'm asking you to analyze your approach, not once, twice. And Eliyahu HaNavi is telling HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I am being zealous for you. I am not doing this for me, but I can't let the Jewish people just do what they want and remain silent. And my approach is harsh. Hit them over the head. Bring severe things to them. Coerce them to do the right thing. Do whatever it takes to bring them back on the right path. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you know what? If that's your approach, you're not the man for the job. Go anoint Elisha ben Shafat me'avel mecholat timshach lenavi tachtecha. Let him be the prophet instead of you. Because if your essence is one of zealotry, I can't ask you to change who you are. I've asked you once, twice, and you're telling, this is my essence. I'm passionate. But I'm passionate in a way that is destructive. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, if that's the case, so then you're not the right man for the job. I appreciate that you're standing up for me, but you're annihilating my people in the process. What does it help if you've gotten the whole Jewish people to do teshuvah if there's no Jewish people left? You ever see the people who do teshuvah and they don't want to? You ever see the sadness on their face? You ever see the bitterness? You ever see how, I once read a whole blog of a mom whose daughter went to Israel, flipped out, became super religious, changed her name, changed her identity, doesn't want to eat at home, doesn't want to talk to her parents, doesn't want to come to family events. She said, I feel like I lost my child. I know you think you may have gained brownie points, but I'm sitting in my home mourning a child that I gave birth to. How could it be that when somebody comes close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, suddenly they become a sadder, angrier, more hurt, more detached, disconnected individual from their family? How could it be? Shouldn't it be the exact opposite? Shouldn't it be that you find HaKadosh Baruch Hu and suddenly your family loves you? Your family cares. I actually saw a beautiful interview they had it on Israeli TV, but I saw a tiny clip of a couple who both grew up, and I don't know what chiloni means, honestly. I don't know who's religious and not. I sometimes think, I told you, it's a bunch of costumes. It's very easy to look religious. Yes? So the guy, what happened was they both grew up, she grew up, I believe, from a kibbutz where it was anti-religious, and he just grew up not religious. And in the process of life and through marriage, he eventually became religious. And they're talking about, so how do you live in the same home where she's not planning on becoming religious anytime soon? And he's very religious. And she said, you should know that since he's become closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, our life has become so much better. Our marriage is so much more beautiful. He speaks to me kindly. He has more compassion on the children. He's a better spouse. He's a better husband. She said, I am so happy he found Hashem. I remember watching this interview and just crying. Shouldn't that be normal? Shouldn't it be that when people approach the Jewish community, they should know this is where we will be finding sane, balanced, normal human beings? Not people that are going to spit at you and cross the street and throw things at you. That doesn't make sense. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu could tell Eliyahu HaNavi, who has pure motives, you understand? Pure motives. This is not the way. You're looking for me. I don't come with thunder and lightning. I don't come with fire and brimstone. I told you, leave it to the other religions. That's not ours. Kol dmama daka. A beautiful, silent voice. A voice that leaves room for your voice too. Because I'm not so busy screaming at you that you should conform to me, as much as letting you find your place in the bigger Jewish community. Letting you grow into who you need to be so that you could add to the beautiful tapestry. Not to this horribly black and white picture that has room for nobody. We find the exact same thing with Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu has the Jewish people complaining. And you have to know, if there was ever a leader Moshe Rabbeinu suffers from leading the Jewish people. I don't know if you've ever run any Jewish events, but I once, I think I shared this with you, I was once in Poland, freezing winter. We're talking about stuck in Nowheresville. And all the ladies could complain about was the rugelach were the wrong brand and the newspaper was the wrong type. 40 years in the desert, the Jewish people come, they don't have water. So Moshe Rabbeinu goes and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, speak to the rock. What does Moshe Rabbeinu do? See what Miriam's doing? He hits the rock. And ultimately HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, why? I told you to speak to the rock. Why did you have to hit it? And we know that ultimately that leads to Moshe Rabbeinu's inability to get into the land of Israel. A very similar critique of speak. Why do you have to hit? Why do you have to thump the Bible over their head? What's it going to help except for break their brains? What does coercion do? It's true, you may be able to make people conform if you scare them enough, if you influence them enough, if you make them uncomfortable enough, if you make them self-doubt enough. There are a lot of ways to get people to change. But just because there are a lot of ways to get people to change doesn't mean it's correct. The end does not justify the means. Not in Judaism. The zealotry, you should know, is not unique to Eliyahu HaNavi. And like I said, Eliyahu HaNavi, we always say, Eliyahu HaNavi zachur latov. Eliyahu HaNavi ultimately is invited to every brit. Hineni noten brit shalom. Hashem says, I'm giving you the brit of peace. You're going to make sure that at every celebration that the Jewish people need peace, you need to be there. You need to bring that extra dose of peace. Because that's the missing puzzle piece. A Navi who had pure motives, but yet the execution was incorrect. No pun intended. Eliyahu HaNavi, your message is correct, your methodology is not. This is not how Jewish people are. We're not here to scare people, to coerce them. You find, now you should know, biryonim, we call them biryonim or biryonim, these zealots, they come up everywhere. Let's be honest, every religion has them, okay? Before the Bet HaMikdash is destroyed, yeah? We know we had Kalba Savua, we had a Kalba Savua, I don't remember the other two names, Nakdiman Ben Orion, and another one, who said, we could technically survive in here for 3 years under Roman occupation with everything that we have inside. Yeah? We could survive this. What happens? You have a group of zealots. What are we? Losers? The Romans are occupying our territory. There's a siege on the city. What do? They go and burn down everything that was in storage, all the silos, all the wheat, everything. And ultimately, who pays the price? We do. We, the people who didn't want to engage in a war. You see, when we are silent about the zealotry in the Jewish community, it's not, they're just a fringe group. They become the spokesmen for us. Because if we don't stand up and say, that's not my Judaism, that's not true, that's not what my Torah says, then by default, they become the spokespeople for us. And that's very dangerous. Because the things that they say, the things that they do, hashtag not my Judaism, right? I'm not signing up for that. Because our Judaism is one that David HaMelech tells us. It has to be pleasant. And if it's not pleasant, it cannot be deracheh. It cannot be her ways. Somebody else's? Absolutely. Ours? Definitely not. And I want to leave us with that thought of what does it mean, right? What does it mean to be zealous for something? What does it mean to be passionate and not cross over the line of cruelty? Right? What does it mean to stand for something, to pick a side, but yet not ignore everybody on the other side of the fence? What about the people who are forever going to sit on the middle of the fence? What do we do with them? Is there room for them in this conversation? What does this picture look like? And Bezrat Hashem, we're going to continue having these conversations of, can we build a Judaism that is inclusive enough for everybody and not exclusive to only those who are willing to conform through the coercion of the zealotry? Because even though there are great leaders, when they're silenced by those who make louder noise, then the Jewish community is in danger. And I believe that we have to have a voice. We have to speak more. But before we could speak, we have to think it through. We have to think it through of, what do I think about zealotry? What do I think about passion? What do I think about taking harsh stances against certain things? What does it mean to stand for something and have a backbone, but yet also be able to be compassionate enough to understand and at least respect the other individual? Can we really hate each other's views and love each other as people? Can that be something that works? Can it never work? Can we dialogue and absolutely disagree but still agree to dialogue? These are really important questions to have. And ultimately, Eliyahu HaNavi, like I said, Eliyahu HaNavi zachur latov. Eliyahu HaNavi, we always say, Motzei Shabbat, Eliyahu HaNavi zachur latov, right? Eliyahu HaNavi, Eliyahu HaGiladi, Hatishbi, bimhera yavo v'yigalenu. Ultimately, the job of Eliyahu HaNavi is not over. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, your zealotry was misplaced. But I promise you that you are going to be the first one to redeem my people. Because you have to take your job, your passion, your zealotry, and turn it into such selfless love for my people that the first one to announce that Mashiach is coming is going to be you. Eliyahu HaNavi, you're the man for the job. Because when you're going to take that passion, that flame, that fire, and hone it in, you're going to be the right messenger to bring the Jewish people back home. And I'm blessing us, Bezrat Hashem. We're waiting for Eliyahu HaNavi. We're waiting for him to come, levaser, that Mashiach is here and bring us back home to Yerushalayim.